The wind in Wyoming doesn't just whistle, it speaks. And out on the high plains, where the sky is so big it can swallow a man whole, it usually speaks of one thing: death. That's the sound Lena heard first, a sound that froze the blood in her veins and stole the air from her lungs. The yips and snarls of coyotes, a big pack, and they were frenzied, hungry, 7 months pregnant, a year a widow. She was utterly alone, a single woman standing against a wilderness that didn't care if you lived or died. Most people would have barred the door and prayed. But Lena wasn't most people, because it wasn't the threat to her own life that made her move. It was another sound, a tiny thread of sound, woven into that savage chorus of predators. The thin, desperate wail of a human baby. Out here, in the middle of nowhere. It was impossible. A trick of the wind. It had to be. But then she heard it again, sharper this time. A scream of pure terror that cut through the coyote chatter and went straight into her soul. It wasn't the wind. It was real. Lena didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy Winchester rifle from its hooks by the door, the cold steel of familiar weight. One hand on the gun, the other cradling the life growing inside her. She ran. She ran toward the sound of death, her bare feet pounding against the sharp stones and thorny scrub of the plains. The sound grew louder, a terrifying symphony of snarling greed guiding her toward a shallow ravine, a jagged scar carved into the earth. She peered over the edge, and her blood ran cold. Down below, a dozen coyotes circled, a fluid, terrifying dance of death. They were lean and mangy, their eyes glowing with a feral light. And in the center of their deadly circle, wrapped in a simple buckskin blanket and lying in a woven basket, was a baby. It couldn't have been more than a few days old. Its face was red from screaming, its tiny fists balled in a futile show of defiance against the inevitable. One of the larger coyotes, its muzzle scarred and its teeth bared, darted in, snapping at the edge of the blanket. It was going to happen. Right now. Right in front of her. A sob tore from Lena's throat. She raised the Winchester, her hands shaking. Her husband, Thomas, had taught her to shoot, but these weren't tin cans on a fence post. She tried to steady her aim on the lead animal, but her vision blurred with tears of rage and fear. She couldn't risk it. She couldn't risk hitting the child. There was only one other choice, a choice that would almost certainly get her killed. With a roar that ripped from the deepest part of her soul, a sound of pure primal fury, she started scrambling down the loose rock of the ravine wall. She deliberately sent a cascade of stones and dirt tumbling ahead of her, making as much noise as she possibly could. "Get away!" she screamed, her voice raw and breaking. "Get away from him!" The sudden noise, the sight of this screaming, pregnant human figure charging down at them, startled the pack. They were opportunists, not warriors. They hesitated, their ears flattened, low growls rumbling in their chests. The lead coyote turned its head, its yellow eyes locking onto hers. It saw the rifle, smelled the scent of a predator as fierce as any it had ever known. Lena didn't stop. She hit the floor of the ravine and charged forward, not even thinking to fire. She was just a screaming force of nature, using the rifle as a club, a barrier, a physical extension of her will. The pack broke. One by one they peeled away, melting back into the tall grass, their hungry yips turning disgruntled. They vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only dust, the scent of wild animal, and the now hiccuping cries of the infant. Her knees gave out. She collapsed beside the basket, the Winchester clattering to the ground. Her body trembled with the aftershock of adrenaline. She reached out a shaky hand and touched the baby's cheek. It was warm, alive. It was a boy. His skin was a beautiful shade of copper, and a shock of thick black hair covered his head. His dark, almond-shaped eyes, wet with tears, stared up at her. He was wrapped snugly, and tucked beside him was a small, intricately beaded pouch. As she gently lifted the child into her arms, the pouch fell open, spilling a single, perfect eagle feather onto the dusty ground. The baby immediately quieted, his cries softening as he felt the warmth of her body. He rooted instinctively toward her, a tiny, trusting mouth seeking solace. Lena looked around, her heart hammering. There was no one. No tracks except for the coyotes. No sign of a mother, a father, anyone. Who would do this? Who would leave a newborn to be torn apart by wild animals? It was a death sentence. As she held the child close, his small life a fragile flame in her hands, she felt a profound shift inside her. The emptiness that had hollowed her out for a year, ever since her husband's death, was suddenly inexplicably filled. This baby was a mystery, a miracle, a terrifying responsibility. And as she looked from his face to the vast, empty horizon, she knew one thing for certain. Her quiet, solitary, grieving life was over. A new, far more dangerous one had just begun. The walk back to the cabin felt like a dream. Lena carried the infant against her chest, his warmth a startling contrast to the cold dread that had settled deep in her gut. With every single step, 1,000 questions screamed in her mind. What was this? A test from God? A cruel trick of fate? The child was clearly of native blood. That was a fact that would not go unnoticed in the nearby town of Redemption's Bluff. The town was founded on two things, piety and prospector's grit, and it held a deep-seated fear and mistrust of the Lakota tribes whose ancestral lands they now occupied. To be found with one of their children, it would invite suspicion, accusation, maybe even violence. She knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to take the baby straight to Sheriff Bart Jones. But a powerful, possessive instinct had already taken root. It was a feeling that defied all logic. This child had been given to her by the wilderness itself. She had faced down a pack of coyotes for him. She had stared death in the face for him. In a way that she couldn't explain, he was hers. She decided to call him Leo, a name that felt strong, like the lion-hearted courage he'd already shown in his first few hours of life. The rest of the day was a frantic blur. She found an old wooden crate and lined it with her softest linens, making a makeshift crib. Using a clean strip of cotton and some boiled cooled water, she managed to get a few precious drops into him. He suckled weakly, but with a tenacious will to live that amazed her. As she cared for him, she studied the impossibly small details of his face, the perfect curve of his ear, the tiny fingernails. The bond between them tightened with every passing moment, a fierce, unbreakable thing. The sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt like a joke. As twilight deepened, a new sound reached her, the rhythmic, steady beat of horses' hooves. This wasn't the frantic clip-clop of a lone rider from town. This was different, slower, more deliberate, and it was more than one horse. Her heart leaped into her throat. She snatched the Winchester again, her other hand hovering protectively over Leo's crate. Peeking through the single glass-pane window, she saw them. 5 riders on horseback, silhouetted against the dying light. They were not cowboys. They were not prospectors. They were Lakota warriors. Their long hair was braided, their bare chests adorned with paint and beads. They sat motionless on their horses, their faces stern and unreadable, spears held upright in their hands. They weren't attacking. They were waiting, watching. At their center was a man who carried himself with an authority that needed no announcement. He was older, his face a roadmap of deep lines etched by sun and sorrow. But his back was straight, and his eyes, even from this distance, seemed to burn with an unholy intensity. This was no random patrol. They knew. Somehow they knew she had the child. The cabin, which had been her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The single door, the 2 small windows, they were no longer defenses. They were vulnerabilities. For what felt like an eternity, there was only silence. A standoff between the lone, pregnant woman in the cabin and the 5 silent sentinels outside. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Finally, the central rider dismounted. He moved with a fluid grace that defied his age, his footsteps making no sound on the hard-packed earth. He walked slowly, deliberately toward her door, his hands open at his sides. It could have been a gesture of peace, or it could have been a prelude to unimaginable violence. Lena's knuckles were white on the stock of the rifle. Her mind raced. If she fired, the others would surely overwhelm her. If she did nothing, what then? The man stopped 10 feet from the door. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, his dark eyes fixed on the cabin, as if he could see right through the sod brick walls, right through her fear, and into her very soul. Summoning a courage she didn't know she possessed, Lena slowly unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. The warrior's gaze met hers. There was no malice in it, but there was a profound, heart-wrenching sadness that took her aback. "You have something that belongs to the Sikangu," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting in a riverbed. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Lena's throat was dry. I, I found him," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "He was alone. The Coyotes." The man's eyes flickered with a brief, sharp pain. "The boy is Wapasha. He is the son of my daughter." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the twilight air. "He is my grandson." A wave of relief and terror washed over Lena. This was his grandfather. He had come for his own. She should have been glad. The responsibility, the danger, it could all be lifted from her. But the thought of handing Leo over, of letting him go, felt like a physical blow. A part of her was being torn away. "I saved him," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I saved his life." The chief, for he could be nothing less, nodded slowly. "The spirits work in ways we do not always understand. They chose a strange vessel for this task." His eyes scanned her, taking in her swollen belly, her disheveled state, her fierce, protective stance. He saw not a threat, but something else entirely. He took a step closer. "My daughter Tasha has walked the spirit road. Her son was taken from her, left for the Shungmanitutanka, the Coyotes." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "We followed the tracks. We found the beast scattered. We found your trail leading from the ravine." He looked past her, into the dim interior of the cabin, his eyes finding the small crate where the baby lay sleeping. "You have given him water. You have given him warmth. You have given him your heart song." Lena didn't understand what he meant, but she felt the truth of it. Her frantic, fearful heartbeat must have been a lullaby to the child. "My people would see you as a thief," the chief continued, his voice dropping lower. "A white woman who has stolen a child of the Lakota. They would call for your blood. But I am the chief. I am Kali. And I see what the spirits have shown me." He raised his hand, palm forward. "You faced the pack. You did not run. You, a woman carrying a child of your own, offered your life for a child of our blood. The Great Spirit, Wakang Thanka, has bound you to him. This cannot be undone." Lena stared at him, bewildered. "What do you want?" Chief Kale's gaze was piercing. "He is of my blood. Now you are of my blood. In the eyes of the spirits, and now in the eyes of his people, you are his mother." He wasn't asking her. He was telling her. He was declaring a truth she could not escape. "You are Wihake Chiaka," he said, his voice resonating with an ancient power. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "Wihake Chiaka," Kali translated, "mother of my blood." He gestured to one of the younger, silent warriors. "This is Chetang. He will remain. He will watch over the mother of my grandson." With that, Chief Kali turned, mounted his horse, and without a backward glance led his other warriors away into the encroaching darkness. He left Lena standing in the doorway of her cabin, the rifle hanging limply in her hand, her world completely and irrevocably shattered. She was no longer just a pregnant widow. She was the guardian of a Lakota child. She was under the protection and the watch of a powerful chief. And outside, a silent, stoic warrior named Chetang had taken up his vigil, a living symbol of the impossible, terrifying promise that had just been forced upon her. The days that followed were thick with a silence that was more unnerving than any noise. Chetang, the Lakota warrior, was a ghost at the edge of her world. He never came close to the cabin, never spoke a single word. She would see him at dawn, a statuesque figure on a small rise to the east, watching the sun climb the sky. At midday, he would be a shadow in the sparse copse of cottonwoods by the creek. At night, she just knew he was out there in the overwhelming darkness, a silent, sleepless guardian. His presence was a constant, unnerving reminder of the bizarre pact Chief Kale had forged. Inside the cabin, life revolved entirely around Leo. The infant, Wapasha, as his grandfather had called him, was a demanding and miraculous creature. Lena's initial fear began to subside, replaced by a fierce, consuming love. She learned the nuances of his cries, the sharp, insistent demand for food, the softer, fretful whimper of discomfort, the sleepy murmur as he drifted off. Lacking mother's milk, she resorted to a desperate concoction of goat's milk from her single nanny goat, watered down and sweetened with a touch of molasses, fed to him from a rag. It was a poor substitute, but Leo was a fighter. He drank, and he grew stronger. Her connection with the child was visceral. When she held him, she felt the steady thrum of her own baby kicking in her womb, a strange double rhythm of life that she had been tasked to protect. The loneliness that had been her constant companion since Thomas's death receded, pushed back by the immediate, overwhelming needs of the tiny being in her arms. The alliance with Chatang was one of gestures. It was a silent, strange language they developed. One morning she woke to find a brace of rabbits, cleaned and dressed, lying on the stone step outside her door. She hesitated, her town-bred suspicion warring with her practical need. But her supplies were dwindling, and the journey to Redemption's Bluff was one she now dreaded more than anything. That evening, she cooked the rabbits into a stew. When she was done, she ladled a generous portion into a bowl and left it on the same stone step, a silent offering of thanks. By dawn, the bowl was empty, washed clean, and sitting beside a small pile of freshly gathered wild onions. This became their routine, their language. A dead rattlesnake, its head crushed, would appear near the woodpile. She would leave a loaf of freshly baked bread. He would leave a handful of medicinal herbs she recognized from a book her mother had once owned. It was a fragile truce, a partnership born of necessity and a shared unspoken purpose, the well-being of the child. But the world was larger than her small homestead. After 2 weeks, her flour was gone, and her salt was running low. The trip to Redemption's Bluff could no longer be postponed. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. How could she possibly explain the baby? She couldn't leave him, and she couldn't hide him. She bundled Leo tightly, securing him in a sling she had fashioned from a blanket, tucking him close against her chest. As she hitched her old mule, Daisy, to the buckboard, she felt Chatang's eyes on her. For the first time, he moved from his perch, walking not towards her, but towards the trail that led to town, before melting back into the landscape. It was a subtle acknowledgement, maybe even a warning. Redemption's Bluff had not changed. It was a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and the sheriff's office. But as Lena drove the buckboard down the main thoroughfare, the town felt different. Or perhaps she was the one who had changed. Doors seemed to close as she approached. Faces appeared in windows, eyes wide with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Then they saw the baby, and the curiosity hardened into suspicion. Her first stop was the general store, run by a gaunt, perpetually sour man named Peterson. As she entered, the low hum of conversation among the few customers abruptly ceased. All eyes went to her swollen belly, and then to the sling. "Lena," Peterson said, his voice flat. "Didn't expect to see you." "Needed supplies, Mr. Peterson," she said, trying to keep her voice even. A woman near the counter, the wife of the town blacksmith, whispered loudly to her friend. "Look at that! And her Thomas not even gone 1.5 years. Shameless!" Lena's face burned. They thought, of course, they thought she had taken a lover, but their whispers turned to confused muttering when Leo shifted and his distinctly native features became visible. The atmosphere in the store curdled from disapproval to alarm. "Where did you get that?" Peterson demanded, abandoning all pretense of civility. His eyes, small and hard, were fixed on the baby. "I found him," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly. "He was abandoned." Just then, the bell above the door chimed and 2 men entered, casting long shadows into the store. One was Sheriff Bart Jones, a big man whose gut strained the buttons of his vest. The other was the town's spiritual shepherd, Reverend Michael, a thin, severe man with eyes that seemed to constantly be searching for sin. "Lena," Sheriff Jones said, his tone attempting friendliness but failing miserably. "Folks are talking. Say you've got company out at your place. I found a baby, Sheriff. Left to die, she said, standing her ground. Reverend Michael stepped forward, his face a mask of pious concern. A heathen child, Lena, an unbaptized savage. You must not let this darkness into your home. It is a temptation, a test from the devil to lead you astray in your grief. He's not darkness, Lena snapped, clutching Leo tighter. He's a baby, and he was going to be eaten by coyotes. An Indian baby? The blacksmith's wife spat. Whose is it? Did the Lakota give it to you? Are you consorting with them? The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Consorting with the Lakota was tantamount to treason in Redemption's Bluff. The memory of raids from years past was still a fresh scar on the town's psyche. Sheriff Jones held up a hand. Now let's calm down. Lena, the law is the law. An abandoned child has to be dealt with through the proper channels. You need to turn him over to me. We'll figure out what to do with him. Figure out what to do with him. The words chilled Lena to the bone. They saw Leo not as a person, but as a problem to be disposed of. She looked at their faces. The sheriff's lazy authority, the reverend's cruel righteousness, the townsfolk's fearful hatred. She knew with absolute certainty that handing Leo over to them would be a death sentence, just as sure as the coyotes had been. No, she said, her voice low and firm. What did you say? The sheriff asked, his eyebrows raising. I said no. He's in my care. He's staying with me. Reverend Michael pointed a long, bony finger at her. You are inviting a serpent into your hearth, woman. You would choose this spawn of the wilderness, over your own kind? Over God's law? I'm choosing to protect a child, Lena retorted, her fear being burned away by a hot, cleansing anger. Something you and your God seem to have forgotten how to do. She grabbed her sack of flour, threw the coins on the counter without waiting for change, and pushed past them, out into the hostile sunlight of the street. She could feel their eyes on her back, a physical weight of condemnation. As she untied Daisy and climbed back onto the buckboard, she saw that the entire street had gone quiet. Everyone was watching her. The widow who had returned from the wilderness with a Lakota baby and a defiant heart. She was no longer just an object of pity. She was an outcast, a traitor, and she was trapped not just between the town and the Lakota, but between her past and a future she could never have possibly imagined. The battle for Leo had just begun, and she had fired the first shot. The journey back to the homestead was a blur of righteous anger and rising panic. The open hostility of the town had shaken Lena more than she cared to admit. She was well and truly alone now, cast out by her own people. Her only ally was a silent warrior who hunted for her, and her only comfort was the sleeping infant whose presence had caused all this trouble. As the days turned into another week, a strange domesticity settled over the cabin. It was an island of calm in a sea of peril. The silent partnership with Chetang deepened. He left not just food, but small practical things. A tightly woven water skin that kept water cooler than her canteen. A handful of flint for her striker when hers wore down. It was clear he was reporting back to Chief Kale. Her every move, her every interaction was being noted. She was being tested. One evening, as a storm gathered on the horizon, rumbling like a distant war drum, Lena was changing Leo's wrappings. As she unwound the soft buckskin, something small and hard pressed against her fingers. It was the beaded pouch she had found with him in the ravine, the one that held the eagle feather. In her frantic first days, she had tucked it away and forgotten all about it. Curious, she emptied its contents into her palm. The single eagle feather lay there, perfect and sacred. But there was something else, something she had missed, a small, tarnished object no bigger than her thumb. She rubbed the grime away with her sleeve. It was a silver locket. It was intricately engraved with vines and flowers, clearly of white manufacture. It was the sort of thing a lady from back east might wear. Her heart began to pound. This changed everything. This was a link, a clue. With trembling fingers, she found the tiny clasp and pried it open. The locket fell open into two halves. On one side, protected by a sliver of glass, was a miniature, hand-painted portrait of a young woman. She had soft, fair hair, blue eyes, and a gentle, almost melancholy smile. Her face was achingly familiar. Lena stared, her mind racing, sifting through the faces of Redemption's Bluff. And then she knew. The realization hit her like a physical blow. It was Abigail Price, the daughter of Jedediah Price, the wealthiest and most powerful man in the territory. Jedediah owned the sprawling P-Bar ranch that bordered these lands, and his influence ran deep in Redemption's Bluff. He funded the church. He kept Sheriff Jones in his pocket. He was, for all intents and purposes, the king of this corner of Wyoming. But it was impossible. Abigail Price had died almost a year ago. The whole town had mourned her. The official story, preached from Reverend Michael's pulpit, was that she had been taken by a sudden, virulent fever that had swept through the ranch. Lena remembered the somber funeral, the way Jedediah, a man of iron will, had seemed to crumble with grief. On the other side of the locket, opposite the portrait, was a tiny folded piece of paper. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled to unfold it. On it, in delicate looping handwriting, were two words. My Wapasha, Wapasha, the name Chief Kale had called the baby. Lena sank onto the stool by the hearth, the locket heavy in her hand, the implications crashing down on her like a rock slide. Leo was not a full-blooded Lakota. He was half white. He was Abigail Price's son. And Chief Kale's daughter, Tasha, she wasn't the mother. What was she then? A protector? A friend? Why would she have the baby? The official story of Abigail's death was a lie. A fever didn't leave a secret baby with a Lakota name. A scandal of this magnitude, the daughter of the town's patriarch bearing a child with a Lakota man, would have destroyed the Price family name, a name Jedediah valued above all else. What had really happened to Abigail? A chilling thought crept into her mind. Had she run away to be with her lover? Or had something more sinister occurred? People like Jedediah Price did not allow their legacies to be tarnished. They cut out the rot. They buried their secrets. Sometimes, literally. This locket was proof. It was truth. And it was dynamite. If she took this to Sheriff Jones, what would happen? Jones was Jedediah's man. The locket would disappear, and she would likely follow suit. If she confronted Jedediah himself, she would be signing her own death warrant. Her only option was Chief Calais. He had a right to know the full truth about the child he believed was his daughter's. A sudden, brilliant flash of lightning lit up the cabin, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The storm had broken. Rain began to lash against the window pane. In the sudden light, she saw Chetang. He was no longer on the distant rise, but standing near the cottonwoods 100 yards away, looking not at the storm, but directly at her cabin. He knew. Not the details, perhaps, but he sensed the shift, the discovery. He was waiting for her next move. Clutching the locket, Lena looked from the portrait of the gentle, sad-eyed girl to the face of the sleeping baby. This boy, Leo, was not just an outcast. He was a bridge between two worlds and the living, breathing evidence of a secret that someone had killed to keep. Chief Kale had called her Wihake Chiaka, mother of his blood, believing the child to be his full-blooded grandson. Now she held the proof that this was not true. How would he react? With gratitude for the truth, or with fury at the deception? She had thought the greatest danger was the prejudice of the town. Now she understood. She was standing on a fault line, a place where the secrets of the white man and the sorrows of the Lakota converged. And the tremor that would tear it all apart was resting in the palm of her hand. The storm passed, leaving the air washed clean and the earth smelling of rain and sage. For 2 days, Lena wrestled with her discovery. The silver locket felt like a cold, heavy weight in her pocket. To reveal its secret was to ignite a fire that could consume everything. But to keep it hidden felt like a betrayal to the two people at the heart of the mystery, the dead girl in the portrait and the living child in the crib. On the morning of the 3rd day, Chief Kale returned. He came as he had before, with 4 warriors, materializing out of the morning mist that clung to the plains. This time, Lena did not wait in the cabin. She met them outside, Leo held securely in his sling against her chest. She had made her decision. Chetang joined the group, his stoic expression giving nothing away, as he spoke quietly to his chief in the flowing Lakota tongue. Kale's eyes, ancient and sharp, moved from Chatang to Lena, and then to the determined set of her jaw. He dismounted and approached her, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as he looked at the baby. "He is well," Kale stated. It was a fact, not a question. "Chatang tells me you are a good mother." "I do my best," Lena said, her voice steady. "But there is something you must know. Something that changes things." She held out her hand, palm up, the silver locket resting in the center. Kale looked at it, his expression unreadable. He did not take it. "It was with the boy," he said. "Yes, I didn't see it at first," she explained. "Open it." With a gravity that suggested he already knew this was a moment of significance, Kale picked up the locket. His large, weathered fingers, surprisingly nimble, worked the clasp. He stared at the two halves for a long, long time, his face a mask of stone. He looked at the portrait of Abigail Price, then at the name Waukesha written on the paper. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. "The daughter of the rancher, Price," he said at last, his voice a low rumble. He snapped the locket shut, the sound like a final judgment. "So, the blood is mixed." "I thought Wapasha was your daughter's child," Lena said softly. Kale's gaze drifted to the horizon, to the hazy blue line of the distant hills. "My daughter Tasha," he began, his voice filled with a profound sorrow, "was not the boy's mother. She was his protector. Her heart was big enough to love a child not born of her own body." He turned back to Lena, his eyes locking with hers, demanding she bear witness to his story. "Tasha, she understood the world of the white man better than most. She learned your tongue, your ways. She saw the good and the great evil in it. She met the rancher's daughter Abigail by the creek that marks the edge of their land. They were not supposed to meet, a Lakota woman and a white girl. But they did. They became friends, sisters of the heart." The story unfolded, painting a picture Lena could never have conceived. Abigail, trapped in the gilded cage of her father's ambition, found freedom and understanding in Tasha. And Tasha saw in Abigail a kindness she had not expected from her people's oppressors. "The girl, Abigail, fell in love," Kale continued, his voice laced with the bitterness of memory. "Not with a warrior of my people, with one of her own. A young man who worked for her father. A good man," Tasha said, "but poor, unworthy in the rancher's eyes. They met in secret. The child, this child, was born of that secret love." "What happened to the father?" Lena whispered. "Jedediah Price found out. He had the boy run off his land, threatening to kill him if he ever returned. He told the girl the boy had abandoned her. He locked her away to hide the shame of her growing belly." The cruelty of it stole Lena's breath. Jedediah hadn't just buried a scandal. He had systematically destroyed his own daughter's happiness. "Abigail knew what her father was capable of," Kale said, his jaw tightening. "She knew he would not allow the child to live, a bastard grandchild to stain his name. She sent word to Tasha. They made a plan. My daughter would help her escape, would take the child and raise it as her own among our people, where the blood of its father would not matter. They would say the child's Lakota father had died, and Tasha was his widow. Our people would accept this." He paused, the pain in his eyes deepening. "But the plan went wrong. The night they were to flee, someone came. Not the girl's lover. Someone else. There was a struggle. My daughter, Tasha, was killed." He choked on the words, the stoic chief's facade cracking for a brief, heartbreaking moment. "They took the baby. I believe they meant to kill him, too. But perhaps they were spooked. They left him in the ravine. A cowardly act. They left him for the Coyotes. A death they could blame on the wilderness." "Jedediah Price," Lena breathed, the name tasting like poison. It had to be him. "The man's heart is a frozen rock," Kale agreed. "He killed my daughter to hide his secret. He stole this child's mother, his father, and tried to steal his life. And he has mourned his own daughter in public while knowing he was the cause of her death." He looked from the locket back to Lena. "I called you Wihakachiaka because I thought you had saved the son of my daughter. I was wrong. The truth is more complex. This boy carries the blood of the white man, the very people who have taken our land and murdered our children. But he was protected by my daughter's spirit, and he was saved by your courage. The bond the Great Spirit forged is not weakened by this truth. It is made stronger. He handed the locket back to her. This, he said, tapping the silver case, is a dangerous truth in your world. You cannot face the rancher alone. What do we do? She asked, her voice, her entire being, now intertwined with his cause. I have honored the peace treaty. I have kept my warriors from the lands of the whites, even as they poison our water and kill the buffalo. Kale said, his voice hardening into cold steel. But a man who murders my daughter and leaves a child to be torn apart by beasts has broken a law older than any white man's treaty. He has broken the law of the earth itself. His gaze was intense, and Lena felt a profound shift in her role. She was no longer just a protector. She was a witness, an instrument. You are the boy's mother now, in the eyes of all, Kale declared. You live in their world. You must be my eyes and ears. Watch the rancher. Listen to the whispers in the town. This locket is the beginning of the story. The end has not yet been written. Find the rest of it, Wihake Chiaka. Find the proof that will show Jedediah Price to his people for what he is, a murderer and a thief of life. He wasn't asking her to be a spy. He was anointing her as an agent of justice, a mother fighting for the truth of her son's past. He turned to leave but paused. Chitang will remain, he said. Do not be afraid. You are no longer alone. As he and his warriors rode away, Lena clutched the locket. The secret it held was no longer just a burden. It was a weapon. And she, a pregnant widow on a forgotten homestead, had just been tasked by a Lakota chief to wage a silent war against the most powerful man in the territory. The weeks that followed were a quiet, nerve-wracking Cold War. Lena lived with the constant, humming tension of her secret. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching rider. She watched the distant P-Bar Ranch through Thomas's old spyglass, seeing the tiny figures of cowboys moving like ants, wondering which of them were loyal to Jedediah Price, and which might know the truth about what happened to Abigail. Chitang remained her silent, watchful guardian. His presence was a comfort, but also a stark reminder of the stakes. He had begun to teach her things not with words, but with actions. He would leave certain plants on her doorstep and then demonstrate from afar how to crush them into a poultice or brew them into a tea. He was preparing her, not just for survival, but for the coming conflict. Her own pregnancy was advancing, her body growing heavy and tired. The baby within her was a constant living clock, counting down to a moment when she would be at her most vulnerable. The thought of giving birth alone, with only a silent warrior outside and a hidden war brewing, was a new and potent source of fear. The breaking point came on a blistering hot afternoon. Lena was outside hanging Leo's washed linens on a line when she saw a figure stumbling across the plains from the east. It was not a rider. It was a man on foot, staggering with exhaustion, his clothes in tatters. Her first instinct was to grab Leo, run inside, and barricade the door. But as the figure drew closer, a jolt went through her. The shambling gait, the shape of the shoulders. It was impossibly, terrifyingly familiar. Thomas! The name was a choked whisper on her lips. It couldn't be. The man collapsed 50 yards from the cabin, falling face first into the dirt. Lena forgot her fear. She forgot her pregnancy. She forgot everything but the ghost who had just appeared on her doorstep. She ran, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. She rolled him over. It was him, thinner, his face covered in a wild matted beard and burned raw by the sun. But it was her Thomas. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and a feverish heat radiated from his skin. "Lena," he croaked, his voice a rasp. "Is it really you? Thomas! Oh God, Thomas!" Tears streamed down her face as she cradled his head. She had mourned him, grieved him, buried him in her heart, and here he was, alive. With a strength she didn't know she had, she managed to half drag, half carry him back to the cabin. As she passed the cottonwoods, she saw Chitang standing in the open, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His eyes were not on her, but on the man she was dragging, his face a grim, stony mask. She got Thomas inside, laid him on their bed, and gave him water. He drank greedily, life seeming to seep back into him with every drop. And then he saw it. He saw the crate by the hearth, and the dark-haired baby sleeping inside. His fever-bright eyes widened. "Lena, what is this? Whose, whose child is that?" The pure, shining joy of his return curdled into icy dread. How could she explain? Where could she even begin? But before she could speak, Thomas's gaze grew distant, and he began to shiver, his mind retreating back into the delirium that had claimed him in the wilderness. For 2 days she nursed him. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering fragmented, horrifying things. He spoke of being trapped in the dark after the mine collapse, of digging his way out, of wandering for months, lost and half-mad in the Black Hills. He spoke of being found by a Lakota hunting party, of being held captive, of escaping, and he spoke of a fire. "The ranch, fire in the distance," he'd mutter, his eyes wide with a remembered horror. "I was hiding, trying to get back to you, saw them by the creek. The old man, Price, he was there, arguing with the Indian woman." Lena's blood ran cold. She sat by his bedside, piecing together the fractured narrative. Thomas, making his desperate way home, had stumbled upon the scene of Tasha's murder. On the third day, the fever broke. Thomas woke up, weak but lucid. His eyes found hers, and this time, they were clear. "I saw it, Lena," he said, his voice weak but firm. "I saw what happened to that Lakota woman. It was Jedediah Price, and he wasn't alone. Sheriff Jones was with him." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. "They were arguing," Thomas continued, his voice trembling. "She was trying to protect someone, hiding them behind her. Price was shouting about his family's honor, his legacy. He grabbed at her, and she fought back. The sheriff, he drew his pistol. I don't think he meant to. She lunged, and it just went off. She fell, and then Price. He saw me in the bushes. He saw me. This was why Thomas had never made it home. They had hunted him. He had fled back into the wilderness, the hunter becoming the hunted. As this devastating revelation settled in the small cabin, a new sound came from outside, the sound of hoofbeats. Not the steady rhythmic beat of Lakota ponies, but the heavy, urgent thud of shod horses. Many of them. Lena looked out the window. A posse of a dozen men, led by Jedediah Price and Sheriff Bart Jones, was riding hard toward the cabin. They weren't coming for a discussion. They were armed for a war. Someone must have seen Thomas's return. Someone had told Price that the only witness to his crime was alive. "He's come to finish it," Thomas whispered, trying to push himself up, "to silence us both." Suddenly, Jedediah's public campaign against her made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't just about the shame of a half-breed grandchild. It was a preemptive strike. By painting her as a Lakota sympathizer, a traitor, he was justifying what he was about to do. "Lena Vance," Sheriff Jones's voice boomed from outside, "you are harboring a fugitive and a stolen child. By the authority of the territory of Wyoming, I order you to come out with your hands raised." Stolen child. He was using Leo, his own grandson, as an excuse to commit murder. "They'll kill us," Lena said, her mind racing. "They'll burn the cabin and say we resisted." "They will," Thomas agreed, his eyes finding the Winchester leaning against the wall. But just as he reached for it, a new sound pierced the air. A high, ululating cry that seemed to come from all directions at once. A war cry. From the ravine, from the cottonwoods, from behind the rise to the east. Lakota warriors on horseback appeared as if from the very earth itself. At their head was Chief Calais, his face painted for battle. And beside him, his knife drawn, was Chetang. They formed a silent, deadly ring around the cabin, trapping the posse between them and Lena's home. Jedediah Price's face, once flushed with righteous fury, turned pale with shock and fear. The hunter had just walked straight into the jaws of a much larger predator. The reckoning had finally come. The quiet homestead had become the epicenter of a war, and at its heart was Lena, her own baby kicking inside her, and her husband, just returned from the dead. The world outside the cabin froze into a tense tableau. The confident posse, now caught between a cabin they meant to destroy and a ring of silent, painted Lakota warriors, shifted nervously in their saddles. Jedediah Price, his face a mask of pale fury, turned on Chief Kale. "This is my land," Price bellowed, his voice straining to project an authority he no longer had. "We are here on official business to reclaim my stolen grandson from that traitor." It was a desperate, masterful lie, but before it could take root, the cabin door creaked open. Lena stepped onto the porch, and behind her, leaning on the doorframe, was the ghost the town had long since buried. Thomas, gaunt but undeniably alive, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. A wave of shock rippled through the posse. Whispers of, "It's Thomas Vance," spread through the men. "She's not a traitor," Thomas called out, his voice stronger than his frail frame suggested. He pointed a trembling finger directly at the patriarch. "And that baby isn't stolen. He was abandoned. I know because I saw Jedediah Price do it. I saw him and Sheriff Jones at the creek, right after they murdered a Lakota woman named Tasha to cover up the scandal of the child's birth." The accusation, coming from a man they all thought was dead, shattered the posse's resolve. All eyes turned to Sheriff Jones, who visibly shrank in his saddle. "Lies! He's mad from wandering in the sun," Price roared, but the raw panic in his eyes betrayed him. Seeing his authority crumble, his fragile sanity snapped. He glared at Lena, at Thomas, at the warriors. "She defied me, my own daughter, shamed my name with a bastard child. I did what I had to do. I cleansed my family's honor." The raw, scream confession hung in the air, damning him completely. In that moment of stunned silence, Lena cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. She grabbed the porch railing, her knuckles white. A wave of pressure washed over her. Her baby was coming, right now. The sight of her pain, of his final witness still standing, sent Price completely over the edge. With a wild scream, he spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol, intending to silence Thomas forever. But he was too slow. An arrow flew from Chetang's bow, silent and swift, burying itself in Price's forearm. The pistol clattered harmlessly into the dust. Chief Kale gave a sharp cry, and his warriors surged forward. The posse, their will completely broken, threw down their guns, wanting no part of Price's murderous madness. The brief, pathetic battle was over before it began. Another wave of pain washed over Lena, and Thomas was instantly at her side, guiding her back into the cabin. Chetang was right behind them, turning to stand guard at the door, a silent sentinel against the chaos outside. The world shrank to the four walls of the homestead. As Chief Kale and his warriors oversaw the binding of Jedediah Price and his disgraced sheriff, the timeless, elemental drama of life began inside. Hours later, as the sun set, a new cry joined the sounds of the evening, strong, healthy, and full of life. Lena, exhausted but triumphant, held her newborn daughter. Chief Kale entered the cabin, the scent of battle replaced by the scent of birth. He looked at the scene. Thomas, the returned husband, Leo, the catalyst, sleeping peacefully in his crate, and Lena, the new mother, holding her beautiful daughter. He walked to her side. "I called you mother of my blood to protect my grandson," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "But the spirits chose you for more. You have faced down murderers and brought new life into this world. You have a warrior's heart." He took the single eagle feather from Leo's pouch and gently placed it beside the newborn girl. "A blessing for the new life," he said. Then he pressed a smooth blue stone into Lena's hand. "In our world, this means safe passage. You are not just a protector of one boy. You are Winyan Wachicha, a woman of the people." Lena looked at her family, forged in fire, loss, and impossible love. Her husband returned from the grave, her daughter a sign of new beginnings, and her son, the boy who started it all, a bridge between two worlds. She was no longer a widow, an outcast, or a victim. Her home was no longer just a lonely cabin. It was the capital of a new kind of nation, a family built not on a single bloodline, but on a shared, unbreakable spirit. And so Lena's story becomes a legend, whispered on the Wyoming wind. A story of how a lone, pregnant woman, faced with the savagery of the wild and the cruelty of men, didn't just survive. She became a queen in her own right. Her kingdom, a small cabin, her subjects a family born from the ashes of conflict. She became the mother of two peoples, a symbol that courage and compassion are a language understood by all, capable of healing even the deepest wounds. This tale is a reminder that the most dramatic, life-altering moments often come not from a gunshot, but from a choice. The choice to act, to protect, and to love in the face of absolute fear. If Lena's incredible journey from widow to warrior mother moved you, please honor her story. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a story of true strength, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the untamed heart of the Wild West. Your support is what allows us to keep these incredible legends alive.